Going to be on week number 76, and it's also bring us into Luke chapter 16. Before we get into our study, Brother Bergstrom, would you mind leading us in a short prayer?
Sure. Shall we bow our heads? We praise thee, O God, King of the universe, the one who made us, the one who gave us life, breathed life into our lungs, and has loved us so. We thank you, dear Lord, for the wonderful word that you have brought us, dear Lord, and the opportunity we have to study the life of Christ and the things that he endured for us, the things that he presented in his teachings to the apostles, to be able to prepare even us 2,000 years later to walk this earth and be able to resist the temptations of the devil. So thank you, our God above, for the opportunity to be here together, brother and sister in Christ, learning about the head of the church, the head of the body, dear Lord, our wonderful Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And we give you all these thanks in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. So I'm going to invite you to turn to Luke chapter 16 for our study today. Actually, our entire week will only be verses 1 through 18. And so today we're going to be looking at verses 1 through 13, and then on Wednesday evening we will finish this up with looking at verses 14 through 18, which means that some of the material in the first 13 verses may also be included on Wednesday night. And so for a good number of weeks now, we have been studying exclusively from Luke's Gospel, which contains occasions in the harmony of the Gospel that are peculiar to Luke and are not found in the other three Gospel accounts. All these events we have been studying recently occurred in the latter Perean ministry. I'd like to point out that even if we go before that, from Luke chapter 10, verse 1, and we're going to be ending the Perean ministry in chapter 17 and verse 10, this section of Luke's gospel you do not find anywhere else in the other gospel accounts, which tells me right here that we have overlooked Luke. Luke is an amazing gospel that deserves more attention. Now, within these chapters, that is between chapters 10 and 17, we found events in Judea not found anywhere else other than Luke, which is very strange. But if you get out of harmony of the Gospels and you see how things line up, you're in Luke exclusively for quite a while. Now, the only exception of this seems to be from John chapter 10, verses 22 through 42, which becomes between Luke 13:21 and Luke 13 and verse 22. And so between those two verses, we have the events recorded in John's Gospel in John chapter 10. But beginning with Luke chapter 13 and verse 22, we are in the later Perean ministry. Where is the Perean ministry? That's right, on the eastern side of the Jordan, say across from Samaria and Judea and Galilee. So he spent time on that side of the Jordan River as well. And then note what you find at the end of the Perean ministry in Acts chapter 17. I said it stops at verse 10. And here's what we read in verse 11 of Luke 17. Now it happened as he went to Jerusalem that he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. So he's left that side of the Jordan River, has crossed over, coming down through Galilee, Samaria, and he's on his way to Jerusalem. But from Luke 17:10, he will go first to Bethany, where he will raise Lazarus from the dead, and that's found in John chapter 11, verses 1 through 14. At that particular point, we're back more or less into a harmony of the Gospels. In other words, we are continuing considering parallel Gospel accounts. But for quite a while now, we have not been doing that. And so he will make a brief visit to Judea in John chapter 11 before returning to Perea and passing through Samaria one more time. Now, we have endeavored to keep in mind the context of these readings, because the context is extremely important for us to understand the meaning of the parables. Nearly everything that Jesus had to say came in the form of a parable. And we certainly have seen that in Luke's gospel. But you know, Matthew's gospel states that more clearer than does Luke. When you look at Matthew chapter 13 and verse 10, we won't go back and read it again, but verses 10 through 16, remember that the disciples, after Jesus gave the parable of the sower, asked Jesus, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" And Jesus explains why he speaks to them in parables. It all has to do with the hearts of the individual who listen to the parable. Parables have a way of distinguishing good and honest hearts from those who are wicked and really are not interested in God's will. And so when we attempt to study a parable apart from its context, we either become immediately confused or totally miss Jesus' reason for issuing a particular parable. And remember, I pointed out in this last set that we just completed, in chapters 14 and 15 of Luke's gospel, that this is a chain, and these are links, one being joined to the other. In just a moment, we're going to begin a new link, or a new chain, I should say, a new series of parables. And what was the reason for Jesus giving these parables in Luke chapter 14 and 15? What was common to all these parables? What do you remember?
Something being lost.
I'm sorry?
In Luke's, that something being lost?
Well, that's what we do with Luke chapter 15. We say, well, Luke chapter 15 is about lost things. And yes, it is about lost things, and there are wonderful things that we can understand. We can learn about studying about lost things. But that wasn't the reason why Jesus gave the parable. Parables. What was the reason? You know, it's even hard for us to pick up on this.
It was for the Pharisees?
Yeah, what did it have to do with the Pharisees, Sister Martinelli?
Well, you know, they always want to be in high places. And
Okay.
the best of the best, and Jesus is kind of knocking their high standard. You know,
They were complaining too that he was eating with like tax collectors and sinners, and they thought they were above that.
Yes. You know, we talk about the nature of lost things, and we can study that in Luke chapter 15. But the reason why Jesus gave these parables was to expose the attitude of the scribes and Pharisees towards the lost. It's not only toward the lost, it's toward a lot of other things, including money. And we're going to be getting into that today. They put their own interest before that of the people that they're supposed to be serving. And so Jesus gave these series of parables in Luke 14 and 15 to contrast the self-righteous Pharisees and scribes' attitude towards the infirmed, the helpless, the tax collectors and sinners of society, with God's care for them. And God cares for them even on the Sabbath day, doesn't he? Remember, that was the first one that came across. Isn't it interesting? People can look at an unfortunate event and see it two different ways. They set Jesus up with this man with dropsy. Evidently had to do with water retention. And evidently they saw to it that he was there. He would not have been the type of person that would have been there otherwise. He would have been an inconvenience to them, but they were using the man to try to put down Jesus. And they wanted to see whether he'd heal them on the Sabbath. And Jesus knew their intention, so he answers them, doesn't he? So they see the man with dropsy, the poor suffering soul there, as an opportunity to discredit Jesus. And how does Jesus see it? To do him good, right? He had compassion on which their religious leaders showed none. In fact, they're using the man. Do we have somebody put up a hand or?
Well, it just kills me how pessimistic the Pharisees are and how optimistic Jesus is in his care for his people, the Jews, because that's what he went to go to first, and then the rest of the world.
You know what, though, Sister Martinelli, as we talk about, his compassion and so on, this thing is going to expand even deeper than this. And it will spread out even to their ability to understand the parables that Jesus gives. We're about to see how that is illustrated by what Jesus said back in Matthew 13. We're going to see the parables at work, distinguishing the hearts of individuals. So this morning we start a new string of parables, but the purpose of these parables is different. Jesus moves from the theme of displaying God's mercy, love, and care to matters of stewardship. And the religious leaders don't take care of that either. They do not see that what they have, what God entrusts with them, belongs to God and not to themselves. Do you think Christians have problems with that too? It's good for us to read these. We all need to remember and live in such a manner that we never forget that every blessing that we receive from God itself belongs to God, and that we are entrusted with these blessings for a short while and will eventually give answer to God to the kind of stewards we have proven to be. Let me ask you, when you think about stewardship, what are we stewards over? Well, that's everything. That doesn't.
I would say the things that he has given us and has trusted us to.
We need to sit down and list them. God gives us all of our blessings, but we sing the song, "Count them one by one," right? It's easy for us to just say, He gives us all blessings, and just pass it over. We don't even appreciate our blessings with statements like that. We don't. And we need to get away from that. And we need to do the same thing concerning our stewardship. I know I'm coming over kind of harsh here, but we need to wake up because we are asleep on this. This is the problem with the Pharisees, and we're borrowing into it. So let's list what we are stewards of. Yes?
Our children.
I was afraid that was the one that was going to be overlooked. And that should be our first one, right? What are our children?
Well, we're supposed to raise them so that they go back to God.
Right. They are a gift from God. Now, children have their own free will and so on, as we do. They're going to have to answer for themselves as we will have to answer for ourselves. But we are stewards over our children. We want to help them find the right way to go. Whether they go that way or not, that's up to them. But our stewardship involves, as they're growing up, leading them in that way, teaching them to love God. And when they serve God, it's because they love God. They want to serve God. Okay, very good. I'm glad you said that one first. Get that?
I was going to say also among our brothers, we're stewardship over due to the fact that we're supposed to edify, encourage, uplift,
Sure.
even our, siblings, as far as sisters, brothers, moms, dads, uncles, we're stewardship of all that because we're supposed to be the light of the world.
Who gave us our family?
God.
Yeah. And we need to remember that we are serving God when we serve our families. Yes, Sister Bergstrom?
Another big one is money, like using our money to, help other people and, to do God's will with it.
That's right. Unfortunately, probably that's the first thing that people say, obviously money. And a lot of times it doesn't go beyond that. But yes, money. Whose money is it? God's money. That's right. I've had discussions even with Christians who try to argue that the money that's in my pocket is mine and the money in the collection plate is the Lord's. What kind of reasoning is that? It's all His. I'm just as responsible for the money that's in my pocket as, say, the elders are for the money that's put in the collection plate. Because we're stewards of both. And we want to see the most good that can be accomplished by it. Yes?
I was going to say, what about our talents, our time?
Well, what about stewardship of time? Who determines the length of our lives? Who knows when our last breath will be? Let's don't forget that. Steve, did you have a comment or? No. Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and look at some things here that we need to consider. Of course, money is going to be a major issue here. Even when we use our money, what we call our money, it has to be done with the right attitude of heart. All of our stewardship is in the heart. Now, even when we are, say, lay by in store on the first day of the week, we put money in the collection plate. What is God looking for? He's looking for a cheerful giver, isn't he? And if you cannot give cheerfully or if you give reluctantly, what does God want you to do? Yeah, keep it in your pocket. He doesn't want people giving him money grudgingly. How would you feel if somebody gave you money that way? Because I'm being forced to. I really don't want to. Yeah. No, thanks. Although some people say, I'll take it. No. Yes. Yeah.
That bothers me. If it's somebody that can't work or I don't mind, but I don't like that.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being wrong then.
No, Sister Laws is talking about, what about people out here, say on the street begging for money? You see this at these intersections? Man, I think they've come up with a new gimmick.
They
I-
got these little children with
Yes, I came back from the bank in Elk Grove on Sunday, on Friday, and on I think 3 different intersections.
And they're pulling at your heartstrings, bringing their little kids with them.
Yeah,
that's the sad
it,
part.
one of them was holding her child by the hand, and 2 had them strapped to the back of on their backs, and they're holding up a sign.
We didn't have a lot growing up, but I would have been embarrassed if it was my parents, somebody begging for money. I was
Yeah.
hungry.
You know, and it does tear at your heart, doesn't it? Because if they are really needful, I think all of us would say, how can we help? But people see this as a gimmick. And now with AI, you hear about that grandmother being ripped off the way she was? By her, somebody pretending being her grandson? Coming by and picking up money, $15,000 and something else, because he got in a car accident and he needed the money for an attorney or something like that. They came and picked it up. That's pretty bold, and it's on a Ring camera. And so you look at this and you say, well, what are you supposed to do? Yes,
Greg and I have this conversation all the time, because when he would go downtown, he would like always give people money, right? And so, like, the conversation we always have is like, how do you know you're not being scammed? How do you know that those people with the kids are not making $40,000 a year doing that? You know, or how do you know, like, the guy is not going to the liquor store with it or whatever, you know? So we keep saying, it's like, Brad's like, that's not my place to judge. Like, they have free will to do what they're doing with it. You know, but like, it's in our heart to like donate to them or not. You know, like, I don't know. So now we just last night we were talking about, we're trying to like be benevolent in other ways that we know are gonna benefit people versus like taking the risk. I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but I don't know.
When I first got out of college, came back home here. This is before I even met Shirley. I was downtown. That was the place to go back then in the early 70s, and just off State Street. And a fellow walked up to me. I'm a young guy, and he says, I haven't eaten for 3 days. Can you give me $1 or something like that? And even then, I looked at him and I said, are you going to go to a restaurant or a liquor store? And at that time, just around the corner, how many of you remember Wimpy's Hamburgers? What was it? That was just off State Street, and it wasn't Washington, was it? It was pretty close down there. I said, hey, I'll buy you a dinner at Wimpy's. He walked away. He wanted it for liquor. Because I wouldn't mind if somebody's really needy and they want food. We want to help. We try to help.
But we also don't want to feel like duped or whatever.
That's right. It's not so much our being duped as it is our reinforcing that type of misbehavior.
What I've done in the past is buy like a $5, McDonald's gift cards, and then I will hand them to them. I mean, just last week,
Well, I didn't have gift cards back then, but
we went to Olive Garden, and as we were coming out of Olive Garden,
right?
there was someone there that was a beggar, and some lady literally bought them food from Olive Garden and handed over a bag to him, and he looked at it and said, thank you so much. Like,
You never know.
You never know, that's right. Yes, Steve?
For those who remember the work in benevolence,
Speak up, so,
for those of us who have ever done benevolence or care or nature, you're developing a cynical viewpoint. Because you see so many people trying to scam churches and everything else out of money.
I'm sorry to say that, Steve. It does leave us rather cynical, doesn't it? Especially when they call up on the phone. You know, and I get that quite regularly. And we have to set up limits, how many times a year a person can ask for help. So we're looking at stewardship, and we're beginning to see a chain of parables in chapter 16. Let's just mention them. We're not going to read them. First of all, we have the parable of the unjust steward. That's what we're going to start studying this morning, verses 1 through 13. And second, we're going to see how greed in the Pharisee's heart rules over the law itself, including what Jesus teaches on divorce and remarriage. You know, you look at verses 14 through 17, and you ask yourself the question, what does that have to do? It's almost as though Luke just threw it in there. But there is a connection with what he's saying here. And then, obviously, when you come to the next parable, the rich man and Lazarus, chapter 16, 19 through 31. And then we have the matter of not forgiving others. And when we're talking about sin, how is that expressed? What word is used for forgiving sins? It's also the word that is used in the model prayer.
Yes.
Debt. So we really do not see forgiveness as a debt. And so what he's going to be talking to us about in this last parable about forgiveness is that, of course, God forgives us as we are willing to forgive others. We are indebted. We have received a gift of forgiveness. How are we going to use that gift? Are we going to use it to forgive others or not? All of this, that's why I asked from the very beginning, what are we stewards over? And you've listed some of them obvious, but we're looking at some others. One being divorce and remarriage. We probably don't even think about that. We'd never put that on the list. And what about forgiveness? What about forgiveness? And so we are first indebted to God, and then to those who have done us wrong. Now you got that in Luke 11 and verse 4. Luke has already dealt with this. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this parable. We spent quite a bit of time preparing for it. Let's read the first 9 verses. Oh, would you mind doing that? The microphone's right there. Luke 16, verses 1 through 9.
He also said to his disciples, "There was a certain rich man who had a steward, and an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him and said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward.' Then the steward said within himself, 'What shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig, I am ashamed to beg. I have resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses.' So he called every one of his master's debtors to him, and said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' And he said, 100 measures of oil. So he said to him, Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, And how much do you owe? So he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, Take your bill and write 80. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. And continue, brother.
Verse 9.
And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home.
I'll tell you what, this is one of the most perplexing parables you can ever imagine. You would not expect Jesus to say this unless we take time to see the point that he's making here. And that point will continue on down to verse 18. Unfortunately, because of time restraints this morning, you're going to have to listen to him years ago. But let's just go over the basics of what we just read. We read of a rich man found out that his manager was wasting his possessions. That's in verse 1. He went to fire the manager, verse 2. The manager was concerned because he could not really work and did not want to beg, verse 3. I guess he'd be like he didn't know how to do anything else, right? He has an idea, verse 4. He called all the master's debtors and offers to clear their debt by a reduced price, verses 5 through 7. By the way, at whose cost? At his master's cost. This is a thing that really confuses us, doesn't it? And so a debt of 100 measures of oil was reduced by 50 measures, half price sale, okay? A debt of 100 measures of wheat was reconciled for 80 measures. And so what did the manager, why did the manager do this?
I think if you try to get as much as you can, you know, I mean, it's better than nothing.
But the money's not going to him.
Is it to make it look like it's less money to work?
He's a
He is
student,
under the master, he's a steward.
but he's fired.
I thought that well, it looks like he's trying to redeem himself in the master's eyes, right?
I thought it was, so he was just trying to make it less.
Isn't this fun?
Trying to make friends, so when he's totally cut off from his master, he could go to these people and say, hey, remember when I helped
Yeah,
you out?
I think Sister Martinelli is hitting upon this. He's lost favor with his master.
Right,
So what is he trying to do? He's trying to generate new friends that will look out for his interest.
So when he said they may receive me into their houses, that's what he's talking about?
Yeah, well,
And if he's done dishonest over his master, I think he would be leery of him being dishonest with them.
I want you to listen to what Sister Anderson said, because I think there's a lot to be said about that. And I was thinking about that. If he's going to be dishonest with his master in front of them, then wouldn't they be leery in trusting him as well?
But do they know he's being dishonest, or are they just like, oh, we're getting a deal?
I think they're getting a deal. And I think the steward is trying to put good under for the master, so he can get his job.
He's already fired, so.
Not when the master's been cheated. Even though the master commends him. And I think that's where, but what is he commending him for? That's what we need to look at. I want to go back to Sister Anderson's suggestion. I was reading this past week, and I got to think about, and forgive me, Sister Marianne, I'm going to refer to a TV Western. She says she doesn't like Westerns. So she said, that's right. Remember the old Bonanza series? Okay. And I remember on one occasion, Ben Cartwright is, of course, he has the big Ponderosa and so on. And they're dealing with some stray cattle, some steers that had come onto his land from a neighbor's. And he wanted to return them to the neighbor. But he had one of the workmen who suggested to him, said, you know, if you look at the brand on their cattle and our brand, it'd be an easy thing for us to put our brand on top of theirs, and so the cattle looks like ours. You know what Ben Cartwright said? Go to the paymaster and get your wages. What? He said, I'm trying to help you. What's wrong with this? Nobody will ever know. And Ben says, if you would do that to my neighbor, you would do that to me.
That's
Right? I mean, we need object lessons like that today, don't we?
What is this
Now
series, brother?
remember, this is the unrighteous steward. So it gives us some things to think about. Yes, Brother Ram. By the way, we're glad to have Brother Ramazetti back with us this morning. Well, you want to tell them what happened?
Yeah, Friday flight is canceled. The Thursday night, I've already checked in on Thursday, and just making sure at midnight after packing, I just went to the website and figured it rescheduled to early hours of June 10th, which is Saturday, 1:15 a.m. And I called at the customer service. Oh, there's operational issues. I don't know what those are, but apparently the flight from there didn't make it here, will not make it here, and then all things of going well. If I had to take the flight, the next day I'll miss the flight. I had to be in Delhi 15 hours waiting for next. I said I cannot then postpone to today afternoon. So right after maybe the Lord's table, I have to rush to the airport.
He could go earlier, but he's waiting to the last minute so he can be with us and get to the airport. And yeah. Okay. We got to take everything together here. And as Sister Shirley says, you know, he's trying to get right with his master, and his master does commend him, doesn't he? But we need to pick up what the purpose of the miracle itself, of the parable itself. The master commends the manager for his shrewdness. We're going to be looking at verse 8 just a little bit here. Was the master commending him for being a thief and wasting his money, that is the master's money? No. It's certainly not likely. If not, why then was the master commending the manager? He commended him for his ability to plan for his future and prepare a life after his firing. Look how verse 8 is worded for us. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. Have you ever heard of a shrewd businessman? How would you describe a shrewd businessman?
Taking advantage of every opportunity, regardless of whether it is ethical or morally right.
Okay, ethical or moral, which tells us it may be legally permissible, but not morally right. In other words, he's not going to go to jail for breaking the law, but everybody knows that he did not do right. See, our society is very confused about that right now. We think, for instance, that if the law says something is legal, then it's morally right. They do that, after all, with abortion, don't they? You can legally get an abortion, but is it morally right? And this has been a real wake-up call for members of the church. I've had these discussions with people because they never really considered it themselves. Because at one time, our laws were based upon the scriptures. At least we had the foundation of the Ten Commandments, which now the Supreme Court not only got rid of the Ten Commandments, which they falsely said were religious in nature and are not, that has to do with moral law. And so now they've gotten rid of moral law. They can't function. They're trying to function without moral law, and they're in serious trouble. So much so that they've had to turn the whole issue of abortion over to the states because they messed it up themselves. And the country is in serious trouble when the court messes things up. I'm not talking about this current court. I think they did the right thing. But the court that threw out moral law back in the early 1960s and leading up to legalizing abortion. So Jesus is not commending the fellow, but the owner is commending his manager. For at least he is shrewd. But it doesn't mean that he did right. He's still an unrighteous steward. And that's where we start having some issues. I'm going to have to mark this because our time has run off. Let me just make a couple of statements for you to consider here. One is by there's a commentary series that comes with the series, and the main writer of the series is David Roper. He suggests that ungodly men know better how to use money to accomplish ungodly purposes than godly men accomplish godly ends. Mm-hmm. You see the point? Now, I think he's hitting upon it. Here's another way of expressing it. Ungodly men know how to use others for their ungodly purposes more than ungodly men know how to interact with others for godly purposes. So people plan more and work harder for ungodly purposes than they do for godly ones. And that's rather disturbing, isn't it? Well, it'd be nice to continue on, but we'll finish this up on Wednesday evening. Thank you so much, and we'll break and we'll come back for worship in a few minutes.